Chapter 61. Gauging Strength, Genjutsu Backlash. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Notes. Raikiri, an S.ranked jutsu also known as Lightning Blade, is Hitaki Kakashi's signature technique. After Team 9 left the Hokage residence, Sarutobi Shinnosuke walked into the office. "Old man, why didn't you let me take this mission? Even if you didn't want me to go to the hostage rescue, why didn't you let me take charge of this mission that's not dangerous?" Sarutobi Hiruzen blew out a mouthful of smoke and said in a low voice, with White Fang in the lead, "This mission is essentially not an issue. You're aware Konoha is not receiving enough missions lately. This reinforcement mission's rank is high, but there's almost no danger, so all forces want to take it. Among the 5 available slots, Danzo asked for 2. As for the remaining 3, after careful consideration, I decided it'd be more appropriate to assign them to Minato's team. After all, I intend for Tonen to accompany you to the Land of Fire soon. Judging from his talent, he'll become a powerhouse sooner or later, which can help you tremendously. This mission is just to make his ninja career record look better. Don't compete with your future subordinates and just take a good break." 10 minutes later, Uchiha Tonen's party arrived at the village gate. They saw 2 Konoha ninjas there, both wearing green flak jackets and forehead protectors, each carrying a tachi on their back. "Are you Konoha's Team 9? Let's introduce ourselves briefly. I'm Kamaya Kazuki. Yoshida Taro." The other Jonin said coldly. Both of them had deadpan, near-paralyzed faces. They introduced themselves expressionlessly. Tonen adjusted his glasses. He was 70% certain these 2 were from the route. Minato nodded and said, "Namikaze Minato." Kakashi said indifferently, "Hitaki Kakashi." And Tonen placed his hands on his knees, bowed very politely, and said, "Uchiha Tonen, please take care of me." "Is he the mission target Danzo?" Sama mentioned. Kazuki showed a stiff smile and said, "Let's first complete the formalities to leave the village, then I'll arrange the garrison sites according to your strengths." The 5 of them headed to the registration office at the village gate and then passed through Konoha's barricade. After walking out of the village, Kazuki took out several maps from his ninja bag. There are 5 towns with garrisons stationed in them, and each has a different probability of reinforcing the 2 lords. "You 3, show the ninjutsu you excel at. I need to get a general understanding of your strength." Minato scratched his head and said, "I'm proficient in the Flying Thunder God, stop talking nonsense, and just show it." Taro impassively berated, being completely discourteous to Minato. The interruption stifled Minato, but he was easygoing by nature. He didn't get offended and instead sincerely demonstrated. He threw a special kunai, and in the blink of an eye, he appeared in another spot. Kazuki's stiff smile was back again. He picked out a map and handed it over to Minato. "Very good, your speed is excellent. This is the map of the town you'll be stationed in." Kazuki turned to Kakashi, who simply raised his hands without saying anything. Crackle, crackle, crackle. Harsh sounds of birds chirping reverberated. Kakashi crouched slightly as his left hand held his right wrist. His right hand was curved like a tiger's claw, ball-shaped lightning flashing violently in it. The scattering electric current looked terrifying and everyone's pupils shrank. Even Tonen wondered, has he already developed the Raikiri? Kakashi's talent is simply absurd. Kakashi suddenly rushed towards the big tree beside him. Bang! A big hole appeared in the tree's trunk and Kakashi retracted his hand. His body trembled slightly as he panted. Tonen raised his eyebrows slightly. "False alarm, that's just a half done product. It flexibly transforms the chakra's shape and nature, but it didn't use the lightning element to stimulate the body's potential and enhance the speed. Without incredible speed, this Raikiri's destructive power is mediocre. Not to mention, it causes high damage to the user." The other 3 also saw through these flaws, but they didn't undermine Kakashi even for a moment due to this. For a Chunin, this move could be a clincher. It was evident that the present immature technique was self-created and no-seal ninjutsu. There was immense potential for development. Kazuki nodded, and handed over a map to Kakashi. It's a promising ninjutsu. This is your map. Kazuki and Taro next turned to Tonen at the same time. Tonen adjusted his glasses and said with an embarrassed look, "Senpai, I'm good at the Sharingan Genjutsu and it can only be used against human targets. It seems I cannot show it here." Taro squinted his eyes and coldly said, "Use it against us, and use your full power." Tonen nodded and said, "All right." He closed his eyes and opened again as the three tomos slowly spun in it. Taro and Kazuki were both expressionless, not giving any inkling into their thoughts. Tonen finished making hand signs and asked politely, "Senpai, may I begin?" Kazuki nodded. "Senpai, please look at my eyes. If you don't do that, it'll not work." Without any hesitation, the two stared straight at Tonen's eyes. In the next moment. Genjutsu, Hell Viewing Technique. The surrounding vicinity underwent subtle changes, which unless closely observed, wouldn't be discernible at all. Kazuki and Taro noticed that Minato and his team disappeared. Kazuki looked around and said lightly, "Is this the Sharingan's Genjutsu?" Taro stood there without any change in expression. Swish! Suddenly, a ninja wearing an animal-style mask appeared in front of them, and said in a loud voice, "You two, the mission has changed, Dan." Before the other party finished speaking, Taro made a hand sign. The illusion was shattered. Tonen screamed in pain. They saw Tonen hunched over with his hands on his knees, blood and tears overflowing from his eyes. He was experiencing the Genjutsu backlash. Taro said indifferently, "Your Genjutsu is rubbish." His team member hurt and rebuked seemed to rattle Minato and he retorted on Tonen's behalf, "Genjutsu is not suitable for facing the enemy head-on. Tonen's Genjutsu is very powerful. It's just that you were warned and prepared, so the effect was not as strong." Kazuki smiled apologetically and handed a map to Tonen. "Sorry Tonen, Taro is always like this." "Alright, this is your map. Let's head to the border together." Had Taro not forcefully broken the illusion, Kazuki himself would have done it. The Genjutsu caster could see what's occurring in the illusion. It was very likely that the information would be leaked. And regardless of whether it exposed Danzo's information or about their mission, both were not feasible for Kazuki and Taro. Chapter 62. Arriving at border, Garrison Town. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Notes. Cursed tongue eradication seal was given to root members to ensure no information about the organization or Shimura Danzo was leaked. Swish! Suddenly, a ninja wearing an animal-style mask appeared in front of them, and said in a loud voice, "You two, the mission has changed, Danzo-sama has an order." Kamaya Kazuki and Yoshida Taro instinctively knelt on one knee and lowered their heads. "Yes." Immediately though they both exchanged a look and reacted at the same time. It was impossible for root members, who had the cursed tongue eradication seal, to call Danzo's name out loud. Therefore, the two of them made a hand sign at the same time and sped up the flow of their chakra. Genjutsu, break. Genjutsu, break. Puff! The moment the illusion shattered, Uchiha Tonen spat out a mouthful of blood, and his Sharingan automatically deactivated. Bloody tears spilled from the corner of his eyes. Namikaze Minato and Hatake Kakashi immediately ran to his side to support him. Seeing Tonen's miserable appearance, Kakashi glared at Kazuki and Taro, his hand reaching into his bag to tightly grab a kunai. Minato, who was always temperate in his demeanor, too was furious. He asked Kazuki and Taro with a standoffish look, "It's just a test, why did you have to forcefully break the Genjutsu?" Tonen hastily waved his hand and weakly interjected, "It's alright, it's me who didn't think it through. I forgot to tell Senpai the code to stop the test." This was the only way for them to break the Genjutsu. Kazuki wanted to make an apologetic expression, but since he always had an impassive face, he didn't know how to. Therefore, He just bowed to Tonen and apologized, "Sorry, we didn't expect your genjutsu to be so potent. Out of instinct, we subconsciously broke it forcibly. Your Sharingan genjutsu is truly powerful." Tonen smiled with a pale face and shook his head, "Senpai, you are praising me too much. If the enemies are on guard and keep their eyes shut, I can't accomplish anything." When everyone present heard this, they couldn't help but frown a bit. Kakashi and Minato both thought, Tonen's 2NA.VE. He divulged such vital information to others. Kazuki and Taro looked at each other without batting an eyelid. Kazuki handed the map to Tonen and said, "This is your map." He then gestured at Taro, who took out 3 thumb-sized tubes with a small red button from his bag. "This is a signal flare, one for each person. Release it when you come into contact with the 2 lords. At that time, everyone must immediately head to its location for support." Since Tonen didn't argue with the 2, Minato and Kakashi also kept their peace. In any case, they did apologize and their action didn't seem intentional. The 3 of them took the signal flare from Taro and put them in their bags. "Tonen, rest for a bit, I'll carry you." Minato thoughtfully carried the weakened Tonen on his back. The 5 people advanced towards the Land of Fire border. For about 2 days, the group was dashing across the forest. According to the map, after a short while, everyone would part ways and take off to their respective garrison towns. Along the way, Tonen was contemplating the abnormal aspects of this mission. The first was the mission itself. An S-ranked mission that needed both Umbu and Root captains. This was around the time that Hatake Sakumo was going to die, which implied this mission was most likely to fail. Unfortunately for him, even though he had worked hard for so long, he had not gained Sakumo's acknowledgement. Though he learned much about the samurai spirit from Sanbo Motoyoshi, he had yet to find a suitable time to have a conversation with Sakumo alone. Am I really going to miss out on a big fish like Sakumo? No, if I can't get his acknowledgement, I should stop his suicide. Either way, once he acknowledges me, with his glass heart, it shouldn't be too difficult to put him to death. BDNV. There was one more point Tonen found fishy, and it was regarding the 2 strange teammates for this reinforcement mission. Tonen had used the hell viewing technique to see through their deepest fears, but he didn't find much. Fortunately, the genjutsu continued, which indicated those 2 did have people or things they dreaded, and from the illusion, it was obvious Danzo was one of them. Coupled with their usual paralyzed faces, it was practically certain they were Root ninjas. Tonen wouldn't dare to relax his vigilance in front of the subordinates of a villain like Danzo, who stopped at nothing to do evil. Especially since he knew that Orochimaru was already experimenting with the Sharingan. There had been no news of missing people in the clan recently, so Danzo might be lacking Sharingan now. But the Uchiha ninjas joined the Konoha police force and it was a bad idea for Danzo to make a move within the village. Wasn't he the best prey then? 3 hours later, the group had already reached closer to the Land of Fire borders. As per the plan, the 5 of them parted ways and headed towards the towns according to their maps. Tonen, however, kept an eye out. Some of his white pigeons followed Kazuki and Taro from a distance. After about half a day, Tonen arrived in his designated town. This kind of a place that was closer to the border, was typically not prosperous. Most of the civilians engaged in farming and some simple business activities. Being a border, the Land of Fire soldiers were stationed here and some genins, who had accepted C-ranked missions, were also here. Most of these genins were relatively older and had no promotion prospects. Although the reward for a C-ranked mission was not too high, it had long-term stability, and there was also a certain amount of profit. Tonen greeted them briefly and checked into an inn following the duty captain's arrangements. He put the tea leaves he carried along into the teapot, mixed it with water, and boiled it on the gas stove. After that, he waited calmly. No matter how strong Sakumo was, he would have just about entered the Land of Rain. Calculating the distance and the inevitable battles along the way to rescue the hostage, it would take about 7 or 8 days for anything to happen. He didn't need to be anxious. Since he knew the original plot, he knew Tsukumo would fail this time. He just didn't know one thing: Tsukumo chose to give up the mission to save whom? The person he saved also blamed him, so it was unlikely to be Kakashi or Minato. From this hypothesis, it could only be the 3 root ninjas involved in the mission. Now that I've not gained Tsukumo's acknowledgement yet, should I first get rid of those 2 teammates? But then, the mission might not end up in failure. I do have time to figure things out. Tonan's thoughts made him smile. He got up and lifted the steaming teapot from the gas stove, and returned to the table. Chapter 63. Rainy Night Assassination, Fleeing to Forest. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Notes. According to Chinese beliefs, the dead must pass 3 tests before passing to the next life, the first being the Bridge of Helplessness. Just when Uchiha Tonan was considering whether or not to kill the 2 dubious teammates, he noticed something through the white pigeon's sight. It was precisely those 2 who right now had briefly greeted the garrison town's personnel and sneaked out. A playful smile slowly formed on Tonan's face as he poured the tea into the cup and took a sip. A moment later he chuckled as if he thought of something funny. Is living well not enough for you all? Why do you keep provoking me? I'm walking on the broad road, but you want to cross your bridge of helplessness. It's not very smart. Time passed by and the sky gradually darkened. The town's civilians returned home to rest, leaving behind only a few small and dim lamps on the streets to battle the pervasive darkness. As if worried the gloom was not sufficient, it began to drizzle. Since this place was near the land of rain, showers and downpours were commonplace here. The fine rain knitted into a soft net, like a sticky and wet cobweb, covering the entire town. Under its curtain, the sounds of insects and birds disappeared in unison, and the town was as quiet as a graveyard. At this moment, 2 figures quietly appeared at the town's edge. Is he in your perception range yet? Yes, I can sense him. He's in that inn, very likely on the 2nd floor. That brat's genjutsu is a bit powerful. To be on the safe side, we'll close our eyes as soon as he activates the Sharingan. As long as we don't look at his eyes, he'll be defenseless. The 2 looked at each other and slinked into the town. As for the soldiers and the genin on duty, they were very unlikely to detect their trace. Rumble with rumbling sounds, the rain became heavier, pouring down in torrents on the ground. The inn's 2nd floor was pitch black, but lightning flashes occasionally lit up the corridor. At this moment, 2 humanoid dot-shaped figures, hanging upside down from the ceiling, could vaguely be seen on either end of the corridor. Yoshida Taro made a hand sign and sensed Tonan's exact location. The 2 treaded softly from both ends to the center of the ceiling. It was pouring heavily, the dense pitter-patter covering the sleeping sound of the inn rooms. The 2 of them walked to a door, step by step, and lightly landed on the floor. Taro gave Kamaya Kazuki a signal with his eyes and they slowly pulled out their tachi. Kazuki reached out his left hand and gently touched the door. The next moment. Bang! The door was blasted open, and it was pitch dark inside. The 2 turned into shadows as they rushed in. Tonan, who was sleeping soundly, woke up with a start. He quickly turned over and sat up. He looked at the 2 intruders and activated his Sharingan. But at that moment, the 2 simultaneously closed their eyes. It's you 2. Tonan exclaimed. Kazuki and Taro didn't care about his fuss and ferociously thrust their tachi in the direction of his voice. Bang! Tonan turned into a cloud of smoke. The 2 noticed something was wrong, and Taro used sensing technique. Immediately afterward, he frowned and said, that was just a shadow clone. There's no one in the room, let me detect him. Taro began to increase his perception range. Crash! Just at that moment, they heard the sound of a trash can knocking over downstairs. The two opened their eyes, and Kazuki hastily rushed to the window and looked below. He spotted Tonen frantically trying to escape in the rain, running into the distance. Chase! The two jumped out of the window. One pursued him through the streets holding his tachi, and the other followed him from the rooftops. Help! Enemy attack! Tonen yelled while running wildly. His every step was so heavy that the water on the ground splashed high. His balls seemed to awaken the quiet town from its slumber. In the narrowly packed residential area, one window after another began lighting up. That damned brat! Kazuki cursed and nodded towards Taro on the rooftop. Taro understood his signal. He sheathed his tachi and formed hand seals. Kazuki joined him on the roof and placed his palms on Taro's back, transmitting his chakra. Nirvana Temple Technique. Many white feathers appeared in the sky and fluttered down to the ground. These feathers seemed illusory. They bypassed the walls and fell into every household. The residents and the genin stationed in the town fell into a deep sleep one after another. Because this technique's range was too large, Kazuki and Taro consumed over half of their chakra. But they had no time to recoup because Tonen was already out of the town and running towards the mountain not far away. To avoid troubles that might arise due to a delay, the two decided to overlook their chakra consumption. They used the body flicker technique to increase their speed, but they were shocked to discover that Tonen too had learned this technique at some point. Bedodem, whenever they were close to catching up, he would use it to increase the distance. Rumble furious thunderclaps were continuously reverberating throughout the mountain for a long time. In the blink of an eye, the sound of rain had turned deafening. The sky seemed to have countless holes, the abundant rain pouring on earth like a waterfall. Coo 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 coo, shrill bird cries grew louder in the mountain forest, making people shudder. Step, step, step. The mountain forest soil was soaked by the rainwater and turned into mud. Tonen ran desperately. He turned back from time to time, his face displaying his panic and terror. Kazuki and Taro continuously jumped one branch after another with tachi in their hands, not leaving sight of their target. They were soaked by the rainwater but did not have a single mud stain on their clothes. The distance between them and Tonen was shrinking at a noticeable speed. Tonen was a trifling chunin in the end. Using the body flicker technique several times was challenging his limit. In their view, he was already a lump of meat on the chopping board waiting to be hacked. Thump! Perhaps because the ground was too slippery, Tonen accidentally fell. He was covered in sludge from head to toe, his appearance miserable. But on the brink of death, he did not care about it. He heaved himself up and crawled on his limbs to get up and run away. Suddenly, he stopped. He realized there was no way to run further because there was a cliff up ahead. He didn't think much or pause for long and ran in another direction. But he stopped again, his panic turning into utter despair. Kazuki and Taro were standing on a big tree straight ahead, staring at him indifferently with tachi in their hands. On their otherwise wooden faces, only their eyes had a hint of disdain. Tonen gasped for breath, knelt on the mud, and slammed his head on the ground. He begged them for mercy. Senpai, please let me go. Chapter 64. Real Memories, Feeding White Pigeons. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Root members would not waste their words on an assassination target, especially when their objective was unambiguous. Ignoring his pleas, Kamaya Kazuki and Yoshida Taro jumped down from the tree and attacked Uchiha Tonen. Tonen raised his head and activated his Scarlet Sharingan. Genjutsu, Hell Viewing Technique. However, the two were guarded against his genjutsu from the very beginning. As soon as he had moved his head, they closed their eyes in unison. Damn it! Tonen gritted his teeth and cursed. The moment they landed on the ground, they used body flicker technique with all their power and disappeared in an instant. In the next moment, they were on Tonen's left and right sides respectively. They ferociously thrust their tachi forward, aiming at his waist. Pucci blood splattered everywhere. Tonen was stabbed. His eyes were wide open, his mouth slightly parted and blood spurted out like free-flowing water. Finally, he gave up and lowered his head. Rumble thunder clapped all around. Lightning flashes made strange shapes and spread out in all directions, splitting the entire sky. It was like a doomsday scene. Just when the two were immersed in the joy of completing the mission. Coo 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 coo, impatient bird cries emerged from everywhere. In the dark forest, many pairs of scarlet and savage Sharingan lit up, looking like a blood-drenched swarm of fireflies. It's all. Sharingan, Kazuki's eyes shrunk, and he gulped. Suddenly, the two of them felt a sharp pain in their abdomens and vomited a mouthful of blood at the same time. They intuitively looked at the source of their torment and their eyes widened in horror. They saw Tonen's head had turned 180 degrees and he was looking at them with cold-blooded eyes. His Sharingan had begun to slowly spin. "They're hungry, I'll have to trouble you too." The next moment, Tonen exploded like an inflated balloon and white pigeons eagerly competed with each other to fly out. What alarmed them more was the realization that they had pierced through each other's bodies with their own tachi. Their blood flowed along the blade and dripped on the ground. Kazuki and Taro simultaneously turned their heads with difficulty and looked at the white pigeons gathering on the cliff's edge. The pigeons fused one by one and turned into Tonen. He didn't have the miserable appearance from earlier. On the contrary, he had gotten an umbrella at some point and was looking into the distance. There was not a speck of dirt on his body. He may even pass off as a relaxed sightseer. Looking at his back view, holding an umbrella, the two of them became absent-minded. After a while, they came back to their senses. The previous scenes in their memory collapsed inch by inch and they recovered their true memories. The moment they opened the door, they wanted to kill Tonen. When Tonen used the Sharingan Genjutsu, they closed their eyes to avoid it. However, they hadn't closed their eyes at all, and they unknowingly fell into the Genjutsu. In this illusion, they used all their strength to release the Nirvana Temple technique, which almost exhausted their chakra. Tonen leisurely held up an umbrella and led the two, who were like walking corpses, out of the town. All the way to this place. Later, he controlled them to stab each other. But when, Kazuki vomited blood and asked in disbelief. Tonen slowly turned around, and his cold and serene Sharingan was spinning slowly. He smiled politely and said in a gentle voice, "When we were at the village gate, I used Genjutsu on you. Didn't you want to see it? How is it? Was it any good? Never mind, I've got an even better technique to show you." Tonen initiated the secret technique, Beast Infestation. Just after he finished, the white pigeons lurking in the forest shrieked at the same time. Their bodies enlarged by several times, and their feathers became raven black and glowed with a metallic luster. Their soft beaks changed into hard black hooked fangs and they rushed towards the two people who were already a withering oil lamp. Flesh-tearing and bones-crushing sounds filled up the forest. In this place, the rain goes away as quickly as it comes. Soon, the dark clouds dissipated, and the downpour gradually stopped. The distant mountain range's outline was framed with a golden hue. What nice weather! Tonen narrowed his eyes, closed the umbrella, and casually threw it down the cliff. Coo coo, a white pigeon that had eaten its fill turned back into its docile appearance and landed on his shoulder. It affectionately rubbed its head against Tonen's cheek. He smiled gently and reached out to caress the white pigeon's head. "Since my senpai asked to see the full power of my genjutsu, it would be really bad for me as a kohai to refuse." The white pigeon nodded like a human. At this moment, another white pigeon flew over and landed on Tonen's other shoulder. He looked at this pigeon and said with a smile, "Thank you for your thoughts, but I'm not hungry." The white pigeon's eyes flashed. It raised its head and swallowed the meat in its mouth. Soon afterward, several white pigeons landed on his body one after another. On the horizon, a red sun peeked from the range's morning mist, dyeing the morning red. It also dyed Tonen and the white pigeons in the same shade. Disperse, return and be alert. Tonen stretched himself and walked towards the town located at the mountain's foot. While passing by the place where the two root members had died, he picked up the ninja bags with disgust. He took out the useful things and put them into his bag. Coo behind, the white pigeons flew away chirping. The morning mist gradually dispersed under the sunlight, and the world became clearer. Not far from the cliff, there were bits and pieces of clothes and two Konoha forehead protectors on the mud. The next moment. Earth-style, dark swamp. The soil turned into a swamp, swallowing all traces. Tonen had in fact left behind a trick at the village gate itself. On one hand, he intentionally let out that his Sharingan Genjutsu would have no effect if the opponents shut their eyes. On the other hand, he used the hypnotic eye to place a suggestion in their subconscious in the illusion world. When those two violently broke his Genjutsu, he had taken the initiative to dispel the illusion and went along with the flow after that. Tonen had thought it would take a long time before he would be able to use this trick. However, beyond his expectation, the chance came so soon. When Kazuki and Taro broke into his room, Tonen had triggered the trick he placed in their subconscious before. As a result, when they saw Tonen activating the Sharingan, they subconsciously thought they had shut their eyes, but their eyes were wide open, and they were affected by the full power of his Genjutsu. In context to this, Tonen's evaluation of the two was only 2 words. Offering themselves. Chapter 65. Failing mission, turmoil begins. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Uchiha Tonen returned to the town, had breakfast in a hotel, and went back to the inn to catch up on sleep. The next few days, the town was calm. Tonen stayed in the inn, continuously using white pigeons to monitor if anyone was coming from the border. As each day passed, he felt something was amiss. With Hitaki Tsukumo's strength, he should have already returned by now. Could it be that Tsukumo and the others arrived at the towns where the 2 root ninjas were stationed? Since there was no one there, no one released the signal flare to notify the rest of the team members. This was possible. However, Tonen had no intention to go over and investigate. If by chance he did run into them, how would he explain? Should he say he had some sort of telepathy and guessed the Jonin stationed in that town had disappeared? In the middle of the night on the 10th day, a red light streaked across the sky, flying over to the town. Tonen got up and rushed to the window to look over. He saw a red light arriving in the sky above the town and exploding like fireworks. Looks like this signal flare had tracing properties, Tonen muttered to himself. Soon afterward, he jumped out of the window and ran toward the direction the red light had flown over. Kamaya Kazuki and Yoshida Taro had intentionally arranged for Tonen to be in the farthest border town to seize the Sharingan. This place was the outermost from where the signal flare was released. Tonen ran for nearly 5 hours before he arrived at the location. The sky had already turned bright. This place was also a garrison town. He saw Hitaki Kakashi standing at the town's intersection. Seeing Tonen, he waved his hand. Tonen ran over and pretended to be panting as he asked, "What about the mission?" "Failed." Kakashi shrugged indifferently. Tonen frowned and asked, "What's going on?" "With White Fang Sama involved, how can it fail?" Kakashi looked behind him, then lowered his voice. "That guy was poisoned by Suna, and to save him, my father exchanged the hostage for the antidote." Tonen suddenly realized, so, that's what happened. That's the correct choice. After all, that person is the root captain, and for Konoha, he's more important than the hostage. In any case, even if the hostage was handed over, Suna would also escort the hostage safely to the employer. Konoha just lost the rewards. It's not a major problem. That guy has a conscience. He said he'd make up for this mission's monetary reward after returning to the village. After speaking, Kakashi pointed to a tea shop in the town behind him and said, "Minato-sensei has already arrived, you can join them. I've to wait for the other two guys. Tonen smiled faintly and said, you've been waiting all this while. How about I wait here instead? Your father failed the mission, you should go console him. Tonen didn't want to meet the route captain, lest he might give himself away when talking about the other two. Kakashi rolled his dead fish eyes and said, there's no need to console. It's just an S-ranked mission. Tonen reached out, pushed Kakashi, and said, just go. In any case, it's the same whether you wait or I wait. Since Kakashi failed to persuade Tonen, he could only nod. Fine. Time passed by slowly. It was already noon but there was no sign of the other two team members. Tsukumo, Aburame Ryoma, Namikaze Minato, and Kakashi had all come to the town's intersection. Tsukumo said solemnly, they're still not here. Perhaps, they ran into enemies. Let's divide into two teams and look for them. However, Ryoma rejected this suggestion without hesitation. No need, since they haven't arrived yet and haven't called for help with signal flares, they are dead. Shouldn't we go check in case they're still alive? Minato scratched his head and asked. Ryoma replied, it was clearly explained that in this mission, whether it's coming late, or not releasing the signal flare in case of danger, both are very serious crimes. Even if they're alive, they'll be executed when they return. This is the route's rule. Tsukumo sighed and nodded, we'll not delay in that case. Let's return to the village. In the Hokage residence, Sarutobi Hiruzen looked at the four people in front of him. He appeared irritated as he smoked. White Fang, you did the right thing. Ryoma, after all, is your companion and also the route captain. Whether it's for you or the village, saving him is more important than an S-ranked mission. Go back and rest for some time. This mission was hard on you. After everyone left, Hiruzen couldn't help sighing, looking at the big monetary reward on the mission sheet. If he had known earlier, he would have sent White Fang alone for this mission. Meanwhile, at the route headquarters, Shimura Danzo looked at Ryoma, who was kneeling on one knee, with a gloomy face. Do you know how much effort I wasted to get this opportunity? And what are the results? The hostage was handed over to Suna because of you. We didn't get that brat's Sharingan. And both Kazuki and Taro are missing. Ryoma lowered his head and impassively replied, Danzo-sama, this mission's failure was indeed my fault. As for Kazuki and Taro, I suspect they exposed flaws midway and made Minato suspicious. A hint of chill flashed through Danzo's eyes, you mean, Minato killed those two? Ryoma wasn't completely certain of this, and he stated another possibility. It could be the Uchiha kid as well. Danzo narrowed his eyes slightly and nodded. This possibility can't be ruled out. As long as an adult Uchiha awakens the three Tomo, he would have an elite Jonin strength. Although this brat's still young, he's already in the golden stage of development. Last time, he was able to kill Ryosuke relying on traps, but this time he might truly be able to defeat two Jonin by himself. It's just that the possibility is too small. After all, before Kazuki and Taro set off, I warned them to pay close attention to his genjutsu. After speaking, Danzo looked at Ryoma who looked like a robot, and discarded his plan to punish him. He sighed, withdraw for now. We'll talk about this later. Yes. After Ryoma left, Danzo leaned on the seat and muttered to himself, Orochimaru's experiment has stopped completely now. I've to find a way to get Sharingan. But none of the Uchihas with the three Tomo Sharingan leave the village. That abominable evil clan, everyone who returned to the village thought they would go back to their former calm lives. However, one piece of news from the land of Waterfall pushed the entire Konoha into turmoil. On that day, Hiruzen furiously rushed to the route headquarters. Danzo stood opposite him and asked indifferently, Hiruzen, how come you found the time to come to my place? Hiruzen threw a scroll at Danzo's feet and said with a solemn look, look at this information yourself. You need to give the village an explanation. Danzo frowned and opened the scroll. Immediately afterward, his pupils shrank. How can this be? Chapter 66. Rising Storm, Danzo's Scheme. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 66. Rising Storm, Danzo's Scheme. Sachitobi Hiruzen was agitated. He suppressed the anger in his heart and said, because of the hostage mission, the Land of Rivers daimyo has now issued an edict. All their missions will be entrusted to Suna for the next 10 years. Do you know how much Konoha lost because of Aburame Ryoma? Shimura Danzo put away the scroll and asked in a low voice, Hiruzen, tell me, what do you want? Hiruzen decisively replied, Ryoma must die. All right. Danzo agreed without reluctance. Someone's head must roll for such a grave matter. Since Ryoma was a mere tool for him, he would simply forfeit it. However, this was not enough to placate Hiruzen. He continued, Root will be downsized and its annual funding will be halved. The personnel will be let go on a large scale. Danzo immediately raised his voice, Hiruzen, do you want to destroy Konoha? Hiruzen snorted and replied indifferently, 3 days later, I'll hold a meeting with the patriarchs and senior officials from Konoha's various clans to discuss this. Prepare yourself. Hiruzen left Root after throwing these words at Danzo, who was left alone and stood quietly on the same spot for a long time. Later in the day, Ryoma's voice could be heard in the Root. Danzo-sama, I failed to fulfill my duty in this mission, I'm willing to accept any punishment. Danzo sat in his seat. In the shadows, his finger continuously tapped on the armrest. Tap, tap, tap. Time passed little by little. Finally, Danzo broke the deadly silence. Send people to spread this news. I want everyone in Konoha to know about this before tomorrow's sunrise. Yes. You've to come together with me in the meeting 3 days later, where you must insist you were asking White Fang to save the mission back then. White Fang alone decided to give up on it. I don't believe Hiruzen will punish him. This is the only way to save your life and the Root. Yes. The next day, the entire village began to talk about this S.-ranked mission. Did you hear? Some time ago, White Fang-sama and Aburame Ryoma teamed up to save the Land of Rivers Princess. White Fang-sama saved the hostage, but Suna poisoned Ryoma. White Fang-sama had to exchange the hostage for the antidote to save him. I also heard about this yesterday. Now, to show their gratitude, the Land of Rivers will entrust all its missions to Suna for the next 10 years. It's a big loss. These missions should have been Konoha's. Yes, Konoha's already not receiving enough missions lately. My son has been resting at home for a month already, but he still has no mission to take. If you ask me, everything is Ryoma's fault. He's really useless. Yes, why did White Fang-sama save him? Shinobi should prioritize the mission. I heard that Aburame Ryoma is an umbu, and he's stronger than most jonin. In these years, he has completed many S.-ranked missions. Anyone would have chosen to save him at that time. Umbu. So he is White Fang-sama's comrade, no wonder. How do you think this will be resolved in the end? I don't know. I heard the higher.ups will hold a meeting in 2 days to discuss this. The damage to Konoha is too heavy. I guess Ryoma will be executed. Tonen also heard these rumors in his clan's district. His mind was filled with several thoughts. This is bad. If Aburame Ryoma says this was entirely Tsukumo's decision, the villagers will turn against Tsukumo. Even if most people didn't want Tsukumo to die, this concerns everyone's interest. Some unpleasant words will be said. For some people, words have no destructive power, but for an overly sensitive person like Tsukumo, it'll be like a blade scraping his bones. I must prepare. Tonen slowly drew out the chakra tanto and caressed its shiny blade. In his mind, he repeatedly recalled the samurai spirit Sanbua Motoyoshi had described. That afternoon, he headed to the Hatake household and trained with Kakashi as usual. Tsukumo was sitting under the eaves, watching the two. On the surface, he didn't show anything unusual. Perhaps it was because the villagers' words were not targeting him but Ryoma. After their training, Kakashi said while panting, "Tonen, you've become stronger again." Tonen stood there calmly, adjusted his glasses, and gently replied, "In order to make you train to your heart's satisfaction, I'm always pushing hard every time." Really? Kakashi was doubtful. In the past, every time Tonen used this excuse, Kakashi believed it. But today, Tonen looked very fake. Tonen shrugged his shoulders and smiled, "For us, true or false isn't important." Kakashi was dumbfounded for a moment hearing his words. Then, the corners of his mouth slightly rose under the mask. He put his hands in the trouser pocket, recovering his usual sluggish look, and changed the topic, "These white pigeons are here again." Tonen looked at a pigeon's flock in the courtyard's garden and walked over. Stroking a white pigeon's head, he said, "They've already become my ninja beast." Ninja beast? Yes, I'm rearing them. It's just that they don't seem very intelligent. I don't know how they can help me. Kakashi thought for a bit and said, "A weak ninja beast like this can be used for scouting at best." Tonen nodded. "That was my plan as well, but no matter how many special feeds they eat, they won't be able to speak or communicate." Kakashi hesitated for a moment. "If you want, there are some sealed summoning scrolls in my house. You can pick a summoning beast you like." Tonen, however, shook his head and said, "No, it doesn't matter if they can't help me. I feel attached to them after raising them for so long." Tonen patted a white pigeon's head and said, "All right, go." The other white pigeons flapped their wings and flew away, but the one in front of him cooed twice and pointed its butt to Tonen. Tonen said with a doting smile, "I just said a few words, and you're angry. Forget it, I don't care about you. Kakashi, I'll leave now." Tonen bade farewell to Kakashi and walked towards the Hatake household's gate. When he was passing through the front courtyard, he bowed to Tsukumo. "Tsukumo-senpai, I'm sorry to disturb you." Tsukumo smiled and nodded. He looked at Kakashi after Tonen left and said, "Kakashi, you need to work harder. I know. Tonen has already surpassed you." "I know." After saying this, Kakashi went back to the courtyard and began to train again. Chapter 67. High-level meeting, condemnation. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 2 days later, in the Hokage meeting room, various clans' patriarchs and senior Konoha officials gathered. As the Umbu and its subdivision route captains, Hatake Tsukumo and Aburame Ryoma were also present. Seeing everyone in attendance, Sarutobi Hiruzen lightly coughed and said, "I believe everyone already knows about the fallout of the recent Land of Rivers mission." Hiruzen had just started speaking, when the Aburame clan's patriarch stood up, deeply bowed to him, and said, "Hokage-sama, please give Ryoma a chance." Hiruzen blew out a mouthful of smoke, ignored the patriarch, and continued, "The mission's failure resulted in a heavy loss to the village. Someone needs to bear the responsibility for this. Ryoma, what do you think?" Hiruzen stared at Ryoma with a meaningful look. Ryoma stepped forward under everyone's gaze, bowed impassively, and said, "Hokage-sama, please don't punish White Fang-sama." Hearing this, everyone's expressions towards Ryoma turned strange. Tsukumo himself was puzzled. Hiruzen frowned and asked, "What do you mean?" Ryoma answered in a low voice, "A shinobi must prioritize the mission. In order to save the hostage, I didn't care about being poisoned and asked White Fang-sama to take away the hostage. I never imagined he would act on his own to give up the mission and exchange the hostage for the antidote, wasting my painstaking efforts." Hiruzen never imagined Ryoma would blame the innocent. His complexion became gloomy. "You mean to say this was White Fang's fault?" Ryoma nodded and said, "Yes, I didn't do anything against the shinobi code during the mission. I was even willing to use my life to complete the mission. But White Fang-sama, despite having completed the mission, decided to give up. He's not qualified to be a ninja. You can ask him whether I asked him to save me or not back then. However, considering he was trying to save me, I don't want you to punish him. Hiruzen looked at the silent Tsukumo. He was so angry that he smiled as he said, "Good, you explained this so well." Even if it was his dereliction of duty, in the end, everything happened because you were poisoned. Could it be that you have no responsibility? Just as he said this, Hiruzen realized his error. And at this time, Danzo impatiently jumped in the conversation. "Hiruzen, the one who committed the fault was White Fang, not Ryoma. Ryoma was just not strong enough. Even if he died in the mission, no one would have said anything. But it's not fair to make him bear the responsibility. As the Hokage, how can you blatantly make Ryoma bear the blame for White Fang's blunder? Won't this dampen the spirits of Konoha ninjas?" Hiruzen hastily explained, "I don't mean that." Danzo snorted coldly, "Even if you don't, from what you said just now, you've already agreed this was White Fang's fault." Hiruzen took a deep breath, looked at the senior officials and patriarchs, and said, "Everyone should be able to see who was at fault here. But who among these patriarchs and senior Konoha officials was not an old fox? They all thought this issue didn't concern them. Moreover, irrespective of what they said, it would offend one side. Calling it White Fang's fault would offend Hiruzen and Tsukumo. Calling it Ryoma's fault would offend Danzo and Aburame clan." Seeing that no one was speaking up for Tsukumo, Danzo inwardly scorned and thought, "Hiruzen, you still don't understand people's hearts. In any case, I can see it's White Fang's fault. As a shinobi, not giving priority to the mission was a mistake. White Fang, what do you have to say for yourself?" Danzo used Hiruzen's tactic and turned the table on Tsukumo. However, Tsukumo was a proud person, who was not good at wordplay. He stammered, Danzo sneered but pretended to be concerned, and said, "Can you explain why you, as a ninja, gave up the mission midway? Is it because your comrades are more important than the mission itself?" Yes. Tsukumo nodded. Hearing Tsukumo's admission, a smile of success appeared on Danzo's face as he said to Hiruzen, "A ninja is just a tool. His mission must take precedence over all else. This is the agreement between every village and the employers. When the employer issues the mission, should we tell them that if the mission is dangerous, we'll first save our companions?" After Danzo finished speaking, Tsukumo immediately knelt to Hiruzen and said, "Sorry, this mission was my dereliction of duty. I'm willing to accept any punishment." Hiruzen glared at Danzo and solemnly said, "In any case, I'm against punishing White Fang. After all, he has made military exploits for Konoha and carried out countless S-ranked missions. His contributions make up for this mistake." Since Danzo had achieved his goal, it didn't matter whether Hiruzen punished White Fang or not. It was enough as long as someone else took the responsibility. Danzo stood up leisurely and said in a victorious tone, "I can't stay in this meeting any longer. If you want to vote on whether to punish White Fang or not, just count my vote against it. Let's go, Ryoma, we don't have anything to do here now." Hiruzen looked at the Danzo with a gloomy look. He then turned to everyone present. However, they all chose to avoid his gaze. Hiruzen looked at Tsukumo, who was kneeling in front of him, and deeply sighed, "Disperse. White Fang, return home and rest. Konoha needs you in the future." Yes. After walking out of the Hokage residence, Danzo confirmed no one was around and whispered to Ryoma. "While Hiruzen hasn't reacted yet, spread what happened at this meeting as quickly as possible." Yes. A few days later, a rumor spread throughout Konoha. The target of the villagers' verbal criticism shifted from Ryoma to Tsukumo. How can White Fang-sama make such a stupid mistake? Aburame Ryoma was willing to exchange his life for the Land of Rivers exclusive missions. But he still gave up the mission. A big figure like him isn't short of money. So, He doesn't care about the life or death of the lower-leveled ninjas. That Ryoma is from Umbu, and White Fang is Umbu captain. A person of White Fang's stature already doesn't care about money, he cares about power. I guess, he gave up this mission to gain Ryoma's allegiance. Is it so deep? I didn't even think about it. Sandaime-sama is already quite old. He might already be secretly looking for a successor in recent years. White Fang wants to compete for the position of Hokage. This explanation makes sense. The Hatake clan has only a few members. As long as White Fang becomes the Hokage, the Hatake clan will become wealthy in just a few years. Why is he so selfish, thinking about just himself and his family? Why would other people consider us? In any case, regardless of what others think, when White Fang wants to run for the Hokage, I will be the first person to object. Stop talking, White Fang is here, if he hears it, you're done for. I'm not afraid. Chapter 68. Tonan's Visit, Issuing a Challenge. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 68. Tonan's Visit, Issuing a Challenge. In the past 2 days, Hatake Tsukumo too had heard the rumors in the village. But those were facts. He couldn't explain anything. Just when he passed by the 2 gossiping people, one of them spat at him. Tsukumo didn't dodge it, and the saliva stuck to his trouser. The passerby sarcastically said, "I'm sorry, White Fang-sama, I didn't see you." Doviko Tsukumo paused for a moment, then lowered his head and left quietly. He didn't even greet us back. If Konoha has a few more selfish trash like him, then we will be done for, sooner or later. In the Hatake household, Tsukumo sat alone in the bedroom in a daze. Kakashi pushed open the door and stood with his fists clenched. He said, "Father, you shouldn't have saved that bastard Ryoma." Tsukumo was startled hearing his son's words. He turned to look at the furious Kakashi and asked with a withering look, "You also think I shouldn't have saved my companion?" Kakashi lowered his head, remained silent for a long time, and replied in a low voice, "Didn't you always tell me a shinobi's mission was the most important?" A hint of loss flashed through Tsukumo's eyes. He nodded and said, "I'm sorry, Kakashi." Kakashi took a deep breath, slammed the door shut, and ran to the backyard to vent his emotions on the wooden stake. His right fist's skin was already torn and bleeding, but he didn't stop. Knock, knock, knock. At this time, Kakashi heard a knock on the door, and his hands stopped. He looked at the sky and knew that Uchiha Tonan had come. He lowered his head and walked to open the door. Tonan was standing outside with a smile and asked, "Kakashi, it's time for training, why do you look so desolate?" Kakashi shook his head and said, "Tonan, I want to rest for some days. I don't want to train." While speaking, he subconsciously hid his bleeding right hand behind him. Tonan narrowed his eyes slightly. Staring at Kakashi, he nodded and said, "Well, then you should spend more time with White Fang-sama. He must be going through a hard time. You shouldn't blame him. He did the right thing. It just affected the interests of other people." After speaking, Tonan turned around and left. In the evening, at a barbecue shop, Namikaze Minato, Uzumaki Kushina, and Tonan were chatting while eating barbecue. Kushina put a large piece of moderately lean meat into Tonan's bowl. "How is Kakashi doing lately? I went to invite him, but he didn't come." Tonan smiled at Kushina and immersed himself into eating. "He has been locked up at home, unwilling to leave. He doesn't even want to see me." Kushina moved the bangs in front of her forehead. She supported her chin with one hand and watched Tonan eat while using the other hand to feed him more with her chopsticks. "This isn't good. The entire village is abusing White Fang-senpai. I wonder when this storm will subside." Minato said in a deep voice while moving meat in front of Kushina's mouth with his chopsticks. "People have short memories. It'll pass in a few days. I'm planning to meet Kakashi early tomorrow. The ninjutsu he used last time was very interesting and gave me some inspiration. I wanted to discuss something with him anyway, I'll console him as well. Kushina gave Minato a thumbs up. Great idea. She put another barbecue meat into Tonen's already full bowl and added, come on, Tonen, eat more, you're still growing. Thank you, Kushina-senpai. Tonen answered trying to look happy. Under the table, his hand was continuously rubbing his bulging stomach. But in his heart, he had dark thoughts. Tomorrow, is it? Early next morning, Minato came to the Hatake household and dragged the unwilling Kakashi away. At that time, in the breakfast shop located at the street corner of Hatake household. It's my turn to enter the stage. Tonen put down his chopsticks and took a tissue to wipe his mouth. He took out a 1,000 Ryo banknote from his wallet, put it on the table, and got up to leave. Your change. The shopkeeper called out as he rushed behind him. Keep the change. Tonen waved his hand without turning back. The shopkeeper looked at the money in his hand and couldn't help sighing, ninjas are so extravagant. Tonen came to the Hatake household. Using the white pigeon's vision he had left in the Hatake household last time, he knew that Tsukumo was in the house. Tonen was worried that Tsukumo would commit suicide too soon, but he didn't dare use Byakugan to monitor him. He hastily knocked on the door. Knock, knock, knock. Tsukumo was at the heart of his struggle now. Tonen's action made passers-by stop and watch. After a while, the door was opened, and Tsukumo stood behind it. Tonen saw that his eyes were lifeless. Tsukumo forced a smile and said, it's you, Tonen. Kakashi just left with Minato. Tonen placed his hands on his knees, bowed to Tsukumo, and said, I've come to meet you, senior. Tsukumo was a little surprised. He shook his head and said, I'm sorry, it's not convenient today, please return. After speaking, Tsukumo was about to close the door, but Tonen's hands were quicker. He held the door that was about to be shut, and there was a hint of determination in his eyes as he said, no, today is the right time. Senior, you can't avoid the samurai duel. Tonen retracted his hand after speaking and said with a serious look, the successor of Sanwa style, Uchiha Tonen, challenges the successor of Hatake style, Hatake Tsukumo. Tsukumo was dumbfounded for a moment and thought about rejecting Tonen. However, out of the samurai spirit, he nodded and said, come in. Tonen nodded and followed Tsukumo into the courtyard. Did I hear it correctly? That kid wants to challenge White Fang. White Fang has triggered the wrath of heaven and anger of men. It's expected for that kid to be so disgusted he wants to sort him out. I remember that kid. He seems to be an Uchiha clan member, called Uchiha Tonen. That was him. No wonder he looks so familiar. Although the Uchihas are horrible, this Uchiha Tonen is notoriously affectionate and righteous. I hope he can defeat White Fang and settle the villagers' grievances. How's that even possible? Although I don't want to admit it, Tonen's strength is not comparable to White Fang. Do you think Tonen will be fine? He should be. White Fang isn't so tactless. He wouldn't be heavy-handed towards a junior. What can a scum like White Fang not do? This is not good, I've to inform the guards. I'll go to inform Hokage-sama. If White Fang dares to harm Tonen, what'll you do? I'll come to his door every night to throw feces. Chapter 69. The Gentleman's Blade, Retreating to Advance. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Notes. Kenjutsu are sword techniques of both shinobi and samurai. They can be used along with taijutsu, ninjutsu, and even genjutsu to achieve more devastating techniques in the Hatake household backyard. With a wooden sword in hand, Hatake Tsukumo walked to the open space, and lightly said, Come, Tonen. Uchiha Tonen, however, shook his head expressionlessly. He slowly pulled out the chakra tanto from his back and solemnly countered, White Fang-sama, prepare everything you need. This is an honorary duel between two samurai factions. Today, if you don't die, then I won't live. Sakumo was stunned. He looked at Tonen, who was holding the chakra tanto, and fell into a daze. Soon afterward, a small smile played on his face. He bowed to Tonen and said, "All right, thank you, Tonen." After speaking, he gently cast the wooden sword to a corner and walked into his bedroom. In there, he didn't directly go to retrieve a weapon but instead crumpled a will lying on the table and threw it into the trash can. He then wrote a new will and tied a white scarf around his forehead. Finally, he grabbed the chakra tanto, came to the backyard, and stood opposite Tonen. Sakumo slowly pulled out the chakra tanto and leisurely said, "This blade is called White Fang. What's your blade's name?" Hearing the question, Tonen brought the chakra tanto in front of him, stroked it lightly, and said, "I've named it Gentleman." Sakumo was confused. Gentleman. The benevolent are not worried, the wise are not confused, and the brave are not afraid. This is my samurai spirit, and also the virtue of my life. So, I call it Gentleman. Sakumo was a little moved, and reflected with admiration, "It's a good name." Tonen slowly shut his eyes and opened them suddenly, activating his Sharingan. "White Fang. Sama, can we begin the duel?" Sakumo nodded solemnly and said, "Come at me." Tonen went all out in the next moment, and his figure disappeared. When he reappeared, Sakumo discovered there were 3 Tonens around him, all rushing over from different directions. Profound meaning, flicker clone technique. Ding, ding, ding. Metal collision resounded in the air. Sakumo stood still on his spot, brandishing the white fang, blocking any attacks from the 3 Tonens. As the challenge proceeded, his surprise towards Tonen's strength increased. In the past, when he watched Tonen training with Kakashi, he could see Tonen always had surplus energy. However, he didn't expect his strength to improve so fast. He was already approaching the Jonin level. This kind of talent. Kakashi, I'm afraid you won't be able to keep up with Tonen's pace for the rest of your life. Sakumo narrowed his eyes slightly. He accurately discerned a flaw in Tonen's movements, swung the white fang to repel one, retracted the tanto to block the other attack, then kicked the one that was attacking from the front. Bang! Tonen was sent flying to the ground. He rolled a few times before getting up and rushed forward to attack Sakumo again. So, this is the main body, then the other 2 must be shadow clones. Thinking this, Sakumo dodged the attack that he believed was from the real Tonen. Then, he appeared behind one of the clones and swung his tanto. That shadow clone was startled and immediately used the body flicker technique to dodge. Pucci blood splatter around. A long wound appeared on the shadow clone's arm. Sakumo's pupils shrank slightly seeing this. It's not a shadow clone. They are all real. Tonen has mastered such powerful ninjutsu. Sakumo was unable to determine which one was the main body for a while. Therefore, he stopped attacking, afraid he would hurt Tonen. Facing the 3 Tonens, he just dodged and blocked. At most, he would find flaws and kick Tonen away without causing any injuries. Tonen, however, didn't care so much. Today, he wanted to use everything he had to gain Sakumo's acknowledgement. As long as he gained it, he would kill Sakumo in one swing as Sakumo wished. But if he didn't gain it until the end, he planned to beat Sakumo half to death, and give him some good advice. To be fully prepared for all outcomes, Tonen's ninja bag contained various life-saving pills and bandages to stop bleeding. As long as Sakumo reigned in his suicidal thoughts, for the time being at the very least, he could even win the slander war for Sakumo with a little trick. On the surface, Tonen might be powerless, but to toy with these shallow villagers in the dark, he had countless tricks. The simplest way was to advance by retreating. Sakumo needed to apologize in public and say he loved the villagers and his companions. And that he couldn't see any of his companions die in front of his eyes. After this, he could easily win people's hearts. The most important thing about this trick was to win the ninjas over. Konoha was a ninja village. Their influence overshadowed that of civilians. Time passed by quickly. The duel between the two fell into a one-sided stalemate. Meanwhile, the guards who received the reports began to rush towards the Hitaki household. Sarutobi Hiruzen also received the news, but he didn't care too much. Hiruzen knew that Tonen would go to the Hitaki household to train. At this moment, Tonen had already activated the Byakugan. He carefully observed Tsukumo's chakra movement and muscle contractions. He used this to predict his next move. But even with this, he was unable to break through Tsukumo's defense. Tsukumo, on the other hand, was getting even more astonished. This strong intrusive feeling, is it sensory ninjutsu? Tonen has greatly surpassed Kakashi. Tonen, let's see how powerful you are. After speaking, Tsukumo's speed increased by more than double. Tonen not only had Byakugan's insight to predict his movements, but also the three Tomo Sharingan's dynamic vision, which could clearly see the attack paths. With all this and using the body flicker technique without caring about chakra consumption, he was able to barely block or dodge Tsukumo's attacks. The worst was that this was not Tsukumo's full power. Tonen realized Tsukumo had not used ninjutsu in this fight at all. He hadn't even used his chakra. He was competing against Tonen using just taijutsu and kenjutsu. Is this Konoha's White Fang's strength? In this so-called samurai duel with White Fang, Tonen too could not use ninjutsu. He narrowed his eyes, preparing to use the ultimate Sanbo-style sword technique move. He dispersed his clones, tightly held the chakra tanto, looked straight at Tsukumo, and said, "White Fang-sama, please be careful." Tsukumo understood Tonen was about to make a big move but he didn't stop him. He just stood there and waited quietly. Tonen narrowed his eyes slightly, jumped up, and raised the chakra tanto high. The tanto in his hands was instantly filled with a lot of white attribute chakra, turning into a long blade light. Sanwa Gale Slash. Tonen yelled and slashed down at Tsukumo. Chapter 70. Killing White Fang, New Inheritance. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Notes. Tsunade Senju is the fifth Hokage in the Naruto world, one of the three legendary Sannin, known for her healing transformation jutsu among other skills. Bang. The blade light slashed heavily into the ground, opening up a long and narrow crack that raised a cloud of dust and smoke everywhere. Tonen, I could have never imagined your strength would have reached this level. Hitaki Tsukumo walked out of the haze with a look of admiration. Tonen hadn't aimed that attack at Tsukumo. Just in case Tsukumo didn't dodge it, he would be cut into two halves. If that happened, even if Tsunade herself returned to the village, she wouldn't be able to save Tsukumo, let alone Tonen's little life-saving pills and bandages. Tonen retracted the blade light without batting an eyelid and said, "It's all thanks to your lessons, White Fang-sama." Tsukumo's expression changed as if he noticed something. He looked up at the roof that now had several figures on it. He took a deep breath and said, "All right, Tonen, it's getting late. I hope you can respect my choice. Make a move, the Hitaki style has lost today." Tonen nodded hearing his words. Chakra fluctuation burst out from his body and his figure became illusory for a moment. Profound meaning, flicker body technique. In the next moment, three figures appeared and they together released the Sanwa Gale Slash at Tsukumo, who was standing at the center with his eyes closed. However, just when those sword lights were about to pierce him, Tonen withdrew the blade light. Puchi the three chakra tanto stabbed Tsukumo's abdomen, thigh, and waist respectively, all of them barely missing the vital organs. Bang! The clones disappeared, leaving behind just the one Tonen in the front. Tsukumo opened his eyes, coughed out a mouthful of blood, and said, "Sure enough, you're too kind, you pulled back at the critical moment." Tonen pursed his lips, shook his head, and said, "No, I just lost control of my hands." Tsukumo smiled a little, and some amount of relief flashed through his eyes as he said, "But you won." Tonen looked dejected. "You let me win, White Fang. Sama. Hereafter, I leave Kakashi to you. I hope you'll take good care of him for me. Tsukumo sighed and added, it seems I made a mistake leading to a huge loss this time. Tonen used Byakugan to observe the degree of Tsukumo's blood loss while resolutely saying, no, you weren't wrong. It's just that in something like this, there will be losses regardless of right or wrong. You've not only made the right choice, but you took responsibility for your decision with your life. You're a true samurai. Is that so? Tsukumo's eyes lit up. He felt the burden weighing on his heart for several days become lighter. Tonen's left hand slowly entered his ninja bag as he said in a determined tone, if there was ever a situation like this in which Kakashi encountered danger, I'll also give up the mission. Ding! Gained Hatake Tsukumo's acknowledgement. The prompts alert in his mind was a source of extreme joy for Tonen. Sure enough, the one you love the most is your son. And you want to leave all your inheritance to him. Just because I made a promise to you, you regard me as his guardian. Immediately afterward, he pulled out the chakra tanto without hesitation. Puff blood poured out, and Tsukumo heavily fell to the ground. After a while, the blood gushing out from the wound became lesser and Tsukumo's eyelids gradually began to close. Before his death, he didn't forget to express his gratitude, thank you, Tonen. A small smile appeared on Tonen's face as he faintly said, don't mention it. Captain, what just happened? You all fell into White Fang's genjutsu. How did he die? White Fang wanted to commit suicide, and he intentionally died in Tonen's hands. So, are we going to arrest Tonen? Let's go for now. We've to report this to the Hokage. This doesn't have anything to do with Tonen, it's White Fang's will. The guards on the roof left one after another. Step. At that moment, Kakashi, who heard the news as well, came to the backyard with Namikaze Minato. Minato frowned looking at the leaving members of the Konoha guard unit and had some realization of what may have happened. As for Kakashi, he looked at Tsukumo who was lying on the ground in shock, then rushed over. Father! Kakashi held his father's corpse and hoarsely yelled again, Father! Tonen silently stood in his place as if mourning for Tsukumo. Kakashi cried for a while. He then turned to look at Tonen, who was expressionless. His gaze slowly moved and stayed on the chakra tanto that was still tainted with blood. Why you? Kakashi's eyes flashed with killing intent, and he quickly made hand signs. A lightning ball appeared on his palm. At this moment, his expression was terrifying. Immediately afterward, Raikiri was thrust towards Tonen. Bang! Tonen, whose strength had skyrocketed, lightly kicked Kakashi away. He slowly put away the chakra tanto, turned around indifferently, and said, White Fang. Sama is a great samurai. If you want to avenge him, double your efforts. I'm someone who can kill Konoha's White Fang. The present you, Tonen shook his head looking at Kakashi, and completed his sentence, is pitifully weak. Tonen turned around and left the Hatake household. The moment he walked out of the gate, he took a deep breath and looked towards the Hokage rock. The power emerging from his body was so potent it was driving him crazy with joy. The sudden increase in strength gave him the urge to laugh loudly. But he forcibly suppressed it. If he truly laughed here, it would ruin his character. Not long after, all Konoha senior officials were informed of White Fang's demise. At the root headquarters, Shimura Danzo was shocked when he heard the news. How's this possible? How could White Fang let that Uchiha brat kill him? According to the villagers, at the Hatake household gate, Tonen said he was challenging Hatake style against his Sanbo style. White Fang should have committed suicide. After all, that fellow still has the stupid belief of the so-called samurai spirit. Meanwhile, at the Hokage residence, Sarutobi Hiruzen slammed the smoke pipe heavily on his desk and stood up in shock. White Fang died. How can Tonen kill him? Even if Tonen wanted to, how could he be White Fang's opponent? A Konoha Guard member replied, White Fan. Sama had been emotionally unstable the past few days. At the time, he even used genjutsu to stop us. Moreover, from what we saw, White Fan. Sama did not resist. Even when he was dying, he even thanked Tonen. Hearing this, Hiruzen slumped back on his seat and narrowed his eyes slightly. Is that so? Is this the so-called samurai spirit, Hokage. Sama, should we issue Uchiha Tonen's arrest warrant? No need, just bring him to me. I'll ask him myself what exactly happened. Yes. Alas, this is a big loss for Konoha.